the Super Bowl outcome probably, in ways that we can't comprehend, affect so many other people, like their mood, what they're going to do going forward, all those kinds of things. So I think the grand scheme of things, I think God is definitely interested in.
In a long enough timeline, God has promised to undo the evil that has been done. If he was to undo that now, that time period of grace would end. That time period of grace that if you are a committed believer, you were depending on before you became a believer. You were depending on him waiting it out so that you could come to faith. There's a million scenarios that a person can go through to where it's like, I'm a good person, why am I experiencing this evil? God is making up the difference for you, because when he looks at you, he sees Jesus. He sees Jesus.
It was that moment, I'll never forget it, that I realized, no, just because my parents go to church or whatever's going on, there has to be something that happens personally between me and Christ.
Welcome back to another episode of the Life and Faith Podcast. Josh, does God care about the results of the Super Bowl?
Good question.
Does God care who wins the Super Bowl?
I would say this. It sounds silly to say, like, yeah, of course he does. But if you think about how God cares and knows the number of hairs on our head, I would think that's a pretty insignificant detail. But I think the larger picture. Short answer, yes. Long answer, I would say the Super Bowl outcome probably, in ways that we can't comprehend, affect so many other people, like their mood, what they're going to do going forward, all those kinds of things. So I think the grand scheme of things, I think God is definitely interested in. Interested in
it.
Yeah.
It kind of comes down to the definition of how we define the word care. Right. For you and I, we don't know the outcome.
Yeah.
So we might care. I mean, it's an historic time for those of us in Michigan, because the Lions are doing better now than they ever have in my entire lifetime.
Yep.
Not just, they're doing good this year like they did 5 years ago or whatever. Mm-hmm. We've won a few bowls, or we've been to a few bowls or whatever. The feeling in the air in our state is, you're seeing Lions jerseys everywhere. Usually it's like they stink and they fail, and there are diehards and stuff like that, but it's different this year.
Yeah.
And this is not a podcast about sports in the sense that we're not going to break down who we think is going to win and all this kind of stuff. It's not like a sports podcast, but
it's funny that you mentioned earlier that, we can't really know who's going to win. Have you heard this theory about the NFL Super Bowl logo color theory?
No.
So there's this theory that for the last couple of Super Bowls that have taken place, they always design a new logo. Well, there's always it's a combination of two colors for the logo because, it says the Roman numeral for what Super Bowl it is.
Right.
In the last 2 years, the colors have closely resembled the two teams that have made it.
Oh, boy.
It's almost like somebody's right in your face calling their shot, and then it's happening. Or some people would say, like, it's rigged.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not saying that I subscribe to that theory, but it's an interesting theory nonetheless. And I was trying to look up. So we don't know the outcome at this stage of the game. The Lions, I believe, are going to the NFC Championship. I hope I'm getting that right. If I don't, then
yeah, they're playing the Niners tomorrow.
Yeah, so the logo colors for this year are red and purple. So there is no blue. So if we're subscribing to this theory, the Lions aren't going to make it.
Now, I can't believe you bring that kind of negativity.
Now, by the time you listen to this, you, the audience, probably already know. So who knows? Maybe this is
Yeah, you
debunked
will.
already.
My hope is that this will get posted before the bowl, but it
Yeah.
will definitely be posted after the results of the NFC
which are
Championship game,
tomorrow, right?
which is that'll be tomorrow.
Yeah.
Now, what brought this onto my radar was just that this is such a big deal for all these folks. I mean, we're talking people. I saw a lady on the. By the way, every local news channel is doing a story about some fan.
Yeah.
And they'll be like 100-year-old lady laying in a bed with blue hair.
I've been waiting my whole life for this.
I thought it would never happen.
Yeah.
There's a guy dresses like Macho Man.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Macho Man. Looks like the Macho Man. All in lion's garb.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lady who said that she drives from the UP down to Detroit for every home game.
Oh, my. That's like 5 hours at least, probably.
It's a
more
5-hour drive.
Yeah.
Okay, so doing the math on that, was there like they play 18 games?
Man.
Let's say half of them are home games.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what the numbers are. Football fans are probably driving their cars off the road because I just said that. But
I think it's about half.
that's about okay. Let's say it's half, plus like a $500 ticket. What are the tickets now? They got to be $200-$300.
So, yeah, they're in the hundreds, and that's usually for not the best seats, which in her case might be, if I was paying all that gas, I wouldn't want to pay for great seats. But I know, like, I looked up the other day just because I was curious what it would take to get in the Super Bowl. Like, the worst seats, I think, start at like $2,000, per ticket. And
I mean, if that's what your thing is, but I figured out, and not to go too deep into that, but I figured out that it would basically be a part-time job, entirely devoted to an 18-week or 9-week affair every year.
Yeah.
Right?
And probably a well-paying part-time job.
I think it would be. I think it would be cheaper. And now
that's no food.
Yeah, for those of you who know what
parking.
the UP is like, there's no way you could do this. But in my mind, it would be cheaper to move down to where you drive a shorter distance, and it would be a lot cheaper to do that.
If you got like a second cheap home, just stay there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, obviously it would be cheaper, but I'm just making the point that it would be easier if you just lived in Clarkston or something, and then you could just drive to Ford Field 9 times out of the year. It would be a whole lot simpler life, Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, all that to say, I'm totally digressed here. But but so we have to look at what the word care means, right? Because for you and I, we don't know the outcome, so we care that the team succeeds. We care that our team wins. We care if they lose, that kind of thing. God cares about that outcome of that game for what I would call different reasons, because he knows the end from the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? So for him, I imagine a scenario where a family is brought together that would otherwise not be brought together because they gather around for sports.
Yeah.
Right? Or they have relationships like maybe brothers or good friends or whatever that maybe didn't even speak, but the Lions are doing well. Do you know what I mean? He's orchestrating 1,000 different.
Yeah, no, you can even track it down to like the economy and the well-being of a town, just because they've had a Super Bowl winner.
That's a great point.
It has more impact to people and places than you would think.
Yeah, and it has things unseen by all of us. Now we say, because I've heard people with the sentiment that sports aren't important. It's not important what's happening there. There's real things going on in the world, that kind of thing. And I agree. For their own sake.
Yeah.
For their own sake. They're not as important as, say, what's going on overseas.
Right.
Or maybe what's going on in our own backyard. We have a lot of concerns in the world, and those concerns certainly outweigh the importance of the results of a game.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could speak to this even from my own experience, I don't think I brought this up on this podcast before, and I didn't want to make any particular episode about me, but I think within the context of what we're talking about, this. So currently, at this point in my life, I've had some really good things happen to me recently that was the end result of a year-long pursuit. But this past year, in pursuing some of these things, trying to flesh out a calling of God on my life, there was some difficulty involved. There was personal difficulty, there was family difficulty, there was all kinds of things that were difficult. And navigating those waters was hard. And there was times where I thought, I'm never going to come out of this season of waiting and preparing and all these things that I was trying to do. And there were times where I just felt like it was going to go on and on and on. And I remember thinking, sometimes it began as a subconscious thought, but eventually ended up in conscious thought where it's just me and God. And I was thinking, God, I need to see something break through here. I need, for my own sake, for my family's sake even, I need something to be able to work out here. So I need to be able to find what is your will for my life, and then just go through that door. Because I felt for the longest time that he was going to open a door, but I didn't know when that door was going to open, which door that was, all those things. So I felt like in my life I'd been through the wilderness, so to speak, in the past year. And
go to a land in which I will make clear to you.
Yeah. And so I was going through that the past year, and I thought, I really need a win. I need a win in my life. And as trivial as this sounds, as silly as this may sound to other people, for the first time in my lifetime, in my dad's lifetime, in the entire franchise of the Texas Rangers, we were talking about football, now I'm switching it to baseball. I had seen in my lifetime in recent years, in the past decade, I had seen the Texas Rangers go to the World Series twice and then lose in heartbreak fashion. Like one time they were even up in the series and the team swung all the way back and just swept the rest of the games and came back and won. And so it was just heartbreaking. But this year, and I don't, so you could kind of break this down and people could be a little critical of this. Is like, you think that the Rangers won for you? Like, I'm not trying to make it about me, but I want to say that the timing there was so perfect. Whether that was intentional, it had nothing to do with me. It was just for me. I greatly benefited from that because where that came about in like the very beginning of November, kind of late October, it was just a very difficult time for me. It was kind of everything that had been happening that year was building up, and I was just really looking for, and it was almost like, and I don't even know if this is necessarily a good way to go about thinking about these things, but that something as small as having the Rangers win it all in the World Series and watching that with my sons, watching that with the rest of my family, my wife, and even my daughters, it gave me kind of this peace of mind that, you know what, things are going to work out. And maybe somebody could be more critical of that assessment of what I just said and say, you're reading into that too much. But for me, it was that little glimmer of hope that something that I had been wanting to see happen for years had happened. And the same took place in my personal life, even as recent as this past month. And so I don't know if there's a direct correlation there necessarily, like only God knows that. But what I do know is that was a boon to me in a time where I really needed something like that. That was just a little thing as encouragement. Some people would say, especially if you're not into sports, you would say, that sounds kind of silly. But if you separate the sports from it and you just say, that was a win for me. I got to experience seeing a team that I cared about, that I had gone every year growing up to go watch and see. And I've been there through the hard times and the really hard times. I've been there through thick and thin. It wasn't a fair weather bandwagon thing. I've been a Rangers fan my whole life. And to be able to see that, it was just, all that tension was just released as a fan. And so being able to correlate that even in my own life, there's a lot of tension building up in my life in every area. And having that pressure release of just seeing a team win, it was good. It was good for me.
And I'm in my 40s. In my entire lifetime, as the Lions go, we've had all the pieces of the puzzle at different times.
Mm-hmm.
At different times, we've had great quarterbacks. We've had great running backs. We've had great defenses. We've had, you know what I mean? We've had all the pieces of the puzzle. We've just never been able to put them all together at one time.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so this year seems to be, this is definitely the closest we've ever been.
Yeah.
And I often say, as a sports fan, you know, if you, I'm a huge, and I don't know that we've talked about it on this podcast, but I'm a huge MMA fan, right? And MMA, the way that works is you cannot predict the outcome. So if you see one person as a good guy and one person as a bad guy, the bad guy could win every time, or the fight could be boring, or it could, you know, there's literally you have no control over the outcome. If you want a control over the outcome, you have to watch professional wrestling. Because that's where the good guy wins,
scripted.
The bad guy loses. You know what I mean? You have that. And otherwise, you put so much, and then so the temptation as a sports fan is to put too much hope into the outcome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To put too much into it. So for you, when you're watching the Rangers every year and they lose, or they, you know, then you have to check yourself and say, like, okay, this is just a game.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Yep.
So for us in Detroit, or in, you know, in the context of Michigan, and this is like, we're talking, at least my lifetime, I don't, you know, I think before the last championship that Detroit had was before the Super Bowl was a thing.
Yes, yep. They've won championship games, but a lot of people would say it doesn't count because it's not in the format of Super Bowls. I'm not going to get into that, but they haven't won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, they've hosted one.
Yeah, yep. Mm-hmm.
They've hosted one, but never been or won.
Yeah, exactly.
We usually die in the first round of the playoffs or don't make the playoffs. That's usually how that goes.
If nothing else, you can say this year. So say the Lions lose tomorrow, and I hope they don't. I'm cheering them on that they win. But even if they did, you can still hold your head high as a Lions fan because you've gotten further than you have before, and you hope that momentum carries you even further the next year, right? And even if it doesn't, nobody can really say the Lions curse, you know, quote unquote. I'm using air quotes here because I don't believe in that, but a lot of people would say they've been cursed for so many years.
I mean, can't argue with the results.
Yeah, I mean, the results do show that, but yeah, that's.
But in any case, you might be asking yourself, what does any of this have to do with the gospel? Well, I'll tell you. When we consider all the little happenings in the world, from the major to the mundane to the maybe quieted things that you don't even hear about, God's concern and care is in every little thing. Now, we do live in a world ruled temporarily by the prince of the power of the air.
Mm-hmm.
So you might be thinking, well, if God cares so much, if he cares about those relationships, or he cares about, in your case, the feeling that you have about your life and how things are going, if he wants you to be encouraged and strengthened in your faith in every step of the way, even during the dark times, then how come bad things ever happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why does it ever? If he cares so much, then why do bad things happen to good people?
It's a huge question.
It's a main question, right? It's a big question that a lot of people have. And I'm not going to try to exhaust the results of that, but I'll just give you a summary of sort of 2 points I want to make about this. One is that in a long enough timeline, God has promised to undo the evil that has been done. On a long enough timeline, Christ returns and has the ultimate, you know, we can get into the end times thing, but I'm just making the point. Like, on a long enough timeline, he's going to undo the evil that's been done.
Right, yep.
If he was to undo that now, that time period of grace would end.
Mm-hmm.
That time period of grace that if you are a committed believer, you were depending on before you became a believer. You were depending on him waiting it out so that you could come to faith. So how many people out there are not believers right now? And this is not a podcast. We would love if you came to know the Lord after listening to our podcast, but this is not a podcast. It's not evangelistic in that way.
Mm-hmm.
We're not. We all have the purpose to seek and save the lost. Right.
Yeah.
That's our goal as believers. Right.
Yeah. I'd say the podcast is probably has a strong chord laced through it of the gospel in it, but we're not actively preaching the gospel on this podcast. Like that's not the,
we're equipping saints,
yes,
to contend in a world ruled temporarily by the prince of the power of the air.
Yep.
So now, if you are listening and you are the believer, you have to look at it like, well, he's waiting to save this person, that person, this person, that person. And we could talk about where the scale is in terms of what is a result of a sin-fallen world and what God is controlling and which parts and everything. But like in the example of the game, okay, the game is the game. You can talk about what part of God controls the outcome of the game. But rest assured, if you look at something and you see love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, those are things of the Lord. So when you see the game and you guys and you win, and you and your dad connect, there's love in that.
Yeah,
the Lord is there, right?
Yep. Every good and perfect gift is from the Lord, it says. So, but the Bible also says like every what would be the opposite of that statement? Like every bad and terrible gift, it's not. That is not also of the Lord. There are things that God allows to happen, but He doesn't intentionally. Man still has free will, so there are things that happen because as a result of man's will. But the Bible does say good things that happen to us, they are from the Lord. They are a gift from the Father.
So there are things that are a matter of Christian liberty, like whether or not you will be a sports fan or whatever. Okay, and there are outcomes and everything like that. But God takes what the world means,
right,
and uses it for good.
Yes. Yep.
Right?
God can even take the will. The Bible says that the heart of the king is in His hand, and He moves it whithersoever He will. In the sense that the king still can act upon his free will, and you see this with like Nebuchadnezzar, for example. But God knew what he and his free will would do, given a certain circumstances and all these things. So there's still free will, but God knows, like He knows our nature. Where if you think about it, like especially from God's point of view, we're creatures of habit, and it can be pretty, even from a man's perspective. I've heard many actual people say that human behavior is predictable. So,
Yeah, that's a big discussion. I did hear a podcast from a guy talking about ultimate determinism one time, and it was pretty compelling, man. I must say,
to get into that, but
no, I it's definitely a good topic, but yeah, it's for another day. I definitely am not ready to hash that one out.
Yeah.
But
I do believe in free will, though. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, I do too.
Yeah.
Okay, I heard someone explain it in a way that made sense to where it was a little bit of both, but I can't rehash that either.
Yeah, essentially, this is the cliff notes of what I would say on this subject. Sovereignty of God is in the Bible, and the free will of man is also clearly in the Bible. So how that, there are certain people who say, well, those are contradictory. I can't make sense of that, so I'm going to throw out the free will. Well, I don't think any part of what God says in the Bible should be thrown out. I think essentially both of those are there, and whether you or I can give a good explanation, or somebody that's a lot more learned and a lot more studied, has a doctoral degree and all that kind of stuff, whether they can explain it or not is not relevant. What's really relevant is how God makes it work. And we can't all claim to have the mind of God and to know the mind of God like He does. His ways are higher than our ways. So He makes that work somehow. And maybe we'll find out more about it when we get to heaven. But I feel like a lot of time is wasted trying to make sense of all that when you just have to go about your life in full confidence, knowing that there's grace and all these things, there's free will, and just do what God commands us to do as Christians.
I got enough to worry about.
Yeah, exactly. let God handle that kind of big picture stuff, and focus on what God has for you to do.
Yeah, what's in front of you.
Yep.
The second point I want to make about this, the first point was just that if God undoes evil, if he does care, but yet evil happens. He will unmake evil. He'll undo it.
That's coming.
But if he did it now, that would mean anybody who's not saved, the time is up. Yeah. So it's a time period in grace right now.
Think about it this way. I just recently preached a sermon on the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. Satan came to Jesus to tempt him with 3 different things. And all 3 of those things were within Jesus' was to do, because he had his fully God, but also fully man. But him being fully man and God wanting him to come to earth to do something specific, to have his life and ministry, to die on the cross, to raise again, it would be outside of God's will, and he would be in disobedience to the Father, even though he could do those things that he was tempted to do. It was not the right timing for it. So I feel like that kind of ties into what you're saying. Like, there's all these things he could stop or he could do, but there's this master plan that you and I, this side of heaven, we cannot wrap our minds around fully. And I am in full confidence, full of faith, that once we get to the other side of things, we'll look back and say, that was perfect.
Right.
Well,
and my point, too, is that we're actually glad that he's not undoing it yet.
Right, yeah.
Because everybody knows somebody who needs to know the Lord. And
exactly.
So you're hoping that he waits.
Yes.
A bit.
Yeah. And if we really come down to the matter of it, like it's graciousness that's holding everything on.
I mean, that's what I was depending on.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if it was right before you or I had the chance to get saved,
Right. Or the people that are in our lives that we love that have been saved since we've come to know the Lord. So yeah, there's definitely good, and like if I'm here for good reasons. If I go for good reasons as well. It's kind of like what Paul said. What Paul was saying.
Yeah.
The second point I want to make about this is that the Bible doesn't really promise that bad things won't happen to good people. It does not say if you are a Christian, everything will be easy.
Yeah.
And
it almost says the opposite. Like in the world you will have tribulation. Yeah.
In the world you'll have tribulation. Right.
Yep. But he also provides hope and says, but remember, I have overcome the world. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So we look at 2 Corinthians 5:21, and we see in a moment where a bad thing happened to a good person. There's a prime example of it. 2 Corinthians 5:21, he made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him.
In him. Mm-hmm.
Bad thing, good person, and it's happening to him.
Yep. Even Jesus himself.
It's kind of the everything before it is leading to it. Everything after it points back to it.
Mm-hmm.
To a bad thing happening to a good person.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And as fallen human beings, because we're all fallen, the worst things that have happened to us does not scale anywhere close to what happened to Jesus, because Jesus had a perfect sinless life, and he took on the sin of the entire world. That's past, present, and future that he took on. So there's nothing. all the bad in the world, you stacked it all together, does not amount to what happened on Calvary. It doesn't even come close. That is why he could pay that price for all of history, all of mankind, because in the eyes of God, which are the only eyes that matter at the end of the day, that's how it weighs out. It's so much proportionally that Jesus went through than any human being on earth or collectively can go through.
I agree. With that, I will say, on some level, we all deserve the worst. On some level, right? Because none of us are
outside
perfect.
of the grace of God.
We are right, precisely.
Right.
We are in this broken, sin-fallen world. We're a part of this broken, sin-fallen world. We're redeemed only by the blood of the cross.
Mm-hmm.
Left to our own devices, we are all deserving.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We all are guilty. But that said, some people are experiencing things that are disproportionately evil by comparison to, say, what other people are experiencing. Right? If we're looking at somebody else's life,
mm-hmm.
while we all sort of deserve death, hell, and the grave.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's just true, and I'm not dismissing that. I look at other people and what they're going through and the challenges that they're facing, and some people are in situations that are absolutely hopeless, right? Mm-hmm. Losing children, being incapable of being really, really sick, going through loss of someone. There's a million scenarios that a person can go through to where it's like, I'm a good person, why am I experiencing this evil?
Mm-hmm.
And so I also don't want to dismiss that.
Yeah.
Right? What we call good, when we say the word good, when we talk about good person, we're talking about as it compares to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it greatly depends on the context. If you're talking about an earthly perspective, if you're talking about relative to other people, that's even going to change. Like, the worst person, the person that's down the worst, so to speak, in Owasso or wherever in Michigan, they could not have it as bad as somebody across, in another nation. So,
right.
Yeah.
There's always going to be some level of some kind of scale there, mm-hmm. where we could look at someone else. Okay, what I'm trying to say is, I don't want to discount the suffering that somebody else is going through and say, well, they deserve it because they're a sin-fallen person. And that might be true on some level.
Yeah, not that anybody deserves it. Yeah.
Well, in the sense that we're not perfect and we are broken and everything, and so therefore we must have invited imperfection into our lives because we broke rules, because we sinned. Do you get what I'm saying? You look like you don't.
Well, no, I'm just trying to think of this scenario through, like, when it comes to the bad things that happen in the world, I do believe that it is a result of sin. Like, sin had an impact on the world, and I'm not even talking about from a human perspective. Like, the ground was cursed at the fall of man, so it impacts people, but it's not necessarily something that they themselves were cursed with. But, like, just this side of heaven, like, nothing was ever promised to be easy. And I feel like there is an entitlement in this day and age of, like, well, I shouldn't have it this bad, or I shouldn't have. This is kind of bleeding into another topic that I was going to talk about today, and it's, I have it worse than this person over here, so I should be entitled to have this over here. That's where I'm coming from it as.
I think I may be reacting to something that I learned when I first became a Christian, and that was the question of, why do bad things happen to good people? The answer was always, because there are no good people.
You're saying that you heard that and you didn't like that, or you're trying to double down on that?
I think it's in one way it's true, because if we look at perfection, there's always some level where we're not good people, in the sense that he's the only one who is good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But there is this other step where we look at somebody who is essentially innocent, who just gets into a car accident, and now their life is permanently affected in some negative way.
Yeah, if we're talking about from like the outside world, especially those who don't have a belief in God or don't have a relationship with Christ, if you take it a step further, they're not going to understand why bad things happen to seemingly innocent people. From a biblical worldview, you understand that we're not guaranteed tomorrow. Nobody is, and sometimes things happen to seemingly good people from or innocent people, and it's not God cosmically deciding to do something to that person. It's just there are things that are set in motion, and that goes back to the sovereignty debate, right? Well, if God's sovereign, then why doesn't He stop these things from happening? Which, I'm by no way an agnostic. Agnostic believes that God set the world in motion and then is hands off. I believe that God's involved, but He also allows certain things to happen. But He has, where I would depart from agnosticism, and I wouldn't be even close to that, but I would say that things are going to work. God has a plan for this earth, kind of like what you were alluding to earlier, and that it's going to work out, and God's going to right the things eventually. It's just here in this moment, He doesn't stop things from happening.
Right.
He lets things continue in motion that man puts into motion. And sometimes innocent people do get hurt.
Exactly. And they endure things that they think, like, what did I do to deserve that? What did this kid do to become an orphan? What did this, old person do to, whatever, to get taken for everything, whatever it might be.
I actually saw something that applies to this recently. There was a Babylon Bee article that was kind of funny that said atheist starts deconstructing his belief, that there is no God, by starting to say, if there is no God, then why do good things happen? Like, kind of the opposite side of the coin of what we're talking about. People saying, if there's a God, why do bad things happen? And then the atheist is like, well, if there is no God, then why do good things happen?
That's a great question. That is a great question. I love that question.
Yeah.
To suggest that there's some part of our lives that God doesn't care about is a crazy idea to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He is the true God and eternal life.
Mm-hmm.
1 John 5, right?
So, forgive me, but I see a strong parallel with what you're talking about with, like, does God care about these things and all that? I see that strong parallel in the disciples being on the boat with Jesus. What they woke him up with, because he was sleeping at the bottom of the boat, what they woke him up was, they said, Master, do you not care that we are going to perish? And, in Jesus' mind, he knows the beginning from the end. Like, he's like, I know we're not going to perish. That's why I'm sleeping down here. But they were like, in their minds, they're going to die, and they could not see a way around this. And they're like, do you not care about this?
It's like this concern is as old as time itself.
Yeah.
It's like it affects... It's such a big question, Matthew 10, are not 2 sparrows sold for a cent, and yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father, but the very hairs of your head are all numbered.
That's good.
So do not fear. You are more valuable than many sparrows.
Right.
Now, we tend to put value on what other people think of us. We might put value on our experiences.
Mm-hmm.
My life is valuable if I can go to the beach and kick back and enjoy the day, right? My life is not valuable if I have to do this thing that I don't want to do, right? That's how we think in the human sense, in the earthly sense.
Yeah.
But actually, value comes from the Lord.
Right.
That's where real value is found, right?
Mm-hmm.
1 Peter 1, knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver and gold from your futile way of life, inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood, as of a lamb, unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. They went so far and paid such a high price. 1 Thessalonians 2, for who is our hope or joy or crown of exaltation? Is it not even you in the presence of our Lord Jesus at his coming? For you are our glory and joy. Right? Paul's talking about the Thessalonian believers and how valuable they are in the sight of the Lord. Aren't you going to be there in this at the time of his coming? You know? We know that we are of God, 1 John 5, and that the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. And we know that the Son of God has come and has given us understanding so that we may know him who is true. We are in him who is true, in his Son, Jesus Christ. This is the true God and eternal life. And ultimately it's leading to what it says in Revelation 21. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. First heaven and first earth passed away. There is no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is coming. Behold, the tabernacle of God is among the people, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people. And God himself will be among them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eye. And there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning, or crying, or pain. The first things have passed away. And he who sits on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. And he said, write, for these words are faithful and true. And he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of water of life without cost.
Thank you for listening to the Life and Faith podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review on your favorite platform, and sharing it with friends and family. Your support helps us continue spreading the gospel of faith, hope, and love. Connect with us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many others to stay updated on our latest episodes. See the link in the show notes for all our social media channels. And until next time, it is our hope you'll commit yourself to an even deeper life and faith.